The video game industry is currently, financially speaking at the very least, in a good place. Riding the wave of the multiplayer boom, able to draw in a paying audience of millions, modern titles frequently have dedicated development teams that can elongate a game's lifespan for years. However, in order to achieve that long-lasting success, an active and enthusiastic fanbase is critical. With so many public platforms to vocalize how they feel, public backing can be the difference between success and failure. The following titles have, a couple of exceptions aside, been a financial success, well reviewed by critics, or in some cases both. However, the one thing they all have in common is instances of pissing off their fanbase, then paying the price in one way or another. Fan backlash can be far-reaching and devastating for a game's development. This ranges from being a minor blip, with fans quick to forgive and forget, to actively ruining the reputation of a major title and the studios behind it. With that in mind, I'm Will for WhatCulture, and here are 10 video games that alienated their own fanbase. 10. For Honor. When it arrived on the scene, For Honor seemed like a unique spin on one-on-one sword fighting. It was one of 2017's most anticipated games, and this was reflected in the huge sales it made in the first few months of release. However, problems snowballed quickly. The matchmaking system was a huge issue, which had players spending minutes at a time looking at a blank screen, before being told they'd been kicked out of the server. The game itself was also marred by technical glitches and balancing issues. A For Honor tournament was won by a player who exploited a well-known glitch which made his attacks faster and unblockable. But then it was revealed that the developers were actually aware of this particular bug and had received frequent complaints about it. So not only did the tournament showcase everything wrong with the game, it was conducted on the biggest stage possible. Add to all this the snafu with the game's economy, requiring 2.5 years of game time to unlock everything, or $752, and fans really struggled to find anything positive to say. Now, For Honor does still have a reasonably active and loyal player base, but its connectivity issues and glitchy design have turned players away. And honestly, rightly so. 9. Fallout 76. Now, whilst not necessarily being the complete disaster it's been made out to be, Fallout 76 was still a blip in the timeline of a company fabled for making quality AAA titles. Although Fallout games have never been famed for their visual qualities, Fallout 76 seemed to be a marked step down in the series. The color palette was drab and unimaginative, and the graphics seemed to have regressed since Fallout 4. Long-term fans weren't necessarily expecting a masterpiece here, particularly as this was the first attempt Bethesda made to bring Fallout into the multiplayer realm. Expectations were also tempered by the fact that previous attempts at online multiplayer games had a lukewarm reception. But nobody expected Fallout 76 to end up as rushed and unpolished as it was. This led fans to accuse Bethesda of rushing out a lackluster game to make a quick buck. Although fans will no doubt look forward to their next release, their reputation as a purveyor of flawless games is now forever tarnished. 8. Star Wars Battlefront 2. Who doesn't love roasting Battlefront 2? It's just fun, but it's also true that it can't be overstated how much it looked like EA had a good thing going with the property. It seemed to be fixing fatal flaws from the first game, and promising early game footage showed Rey kicking battle droid ass. Unfortunately, loot boxes were implemented as the game's main currency. The player could unlock in-game rewards by grinding for hours to unlock in-game content or purchase loot boxes. Using the latter method, players could literally buy their way to victory, putting minimal effort into the game. This caused a huge backlash at launch, with many gamers stating they would never buy the game, regardless of any improvements made further down the line. The feedback was so bad that DICE released a statement saying their intent was to, quote, provide players with a sense of pride and accomplishment by unlocking different heroes. It remains, to this day, the most downvoted comment in Reddit history ever. Although the loot box system was quickly removed, the damage had already been done. Despite being critically acclaimed, the backlash resulted in relatively poor sales, losing EA millions of dollars. 7. Apex Legends. Once seen as a contender to Fortnite, Apex Legends leapt into our consoles in February 2019. It boasted pretty great shooting mechanics, honestly, and an innovative ping system which lets you talk to other players without actually talking to them. It seemed like it had everything going for it. But then, tragically, the dreaded loot box system was introduced, making players pay for cosmetic items at massively inflated prices. This led to a standoff between fans and the developers at Respawn Entertainment. Fan displeasure was met with the developers calling fans, quote, freeloaders and, quote, asshats, among other stronger terms I'm not allowed to say on YouTube. I'm no industry expert, I admit it, but calling your fans asshats is not the best way to build a loyal fan base, especially when they have legitimate concerns about your crappy, greedy loot box system. This disconnect between fans and developers, coupled with Respawn's reluctance to make major and frequent updates to the game, and some uninspiring battle passes, has led to a steady decline in users and streamers over time. 6. Resident Evil 6. The success of Resident Evil games eventually proved to be the downfall of the franchise. Resi 4 introduced features seldom seen in a horror title, namely that over-the-shoulder viewpoint, quick-time events, and more visceral action. And Resi 4 was a great game, so when it was carried over to Resi 6 and delivered on a much grander scale than its predecessors, it wasn't crazy to think it might work. However, Resi 6 was just an ambitious but thoroughly underwhelming product. While Leon's campaign replicated the classic survival horror feel of the originals, Chris's campaign was no more than a Gears of War ripoff, using cover and shoot tactics alongside a grey and drab landscape. Considering the high watermark of previous entries, Resident Evil 6 felt so far removed from what made the series so fun to play in the first place. This was reflected in overall sales of the game, the poll showing forcing Capcom to lower the company's financial projections for the year. But, you know, upside, it did lead to Resident Evil 7, which is awesome, so, I'll take it. 5. Fortnite. Although Fortnite wasn't the first Battle Royale game to hit our consoles, it remains, by far, the most popular. Say what you like about the gameplay and annoying dances and those screeching 12-year-olds, but it has become an undeniable pop culture sensation. In Season 10, though, Epic introduced Brutes, which were effectively walking mechs of death. For a game built around building mechanics, this took away a vital sense of balance. These hugely overpowered units of destruction had a rocket attack which could destroy players and buildings alike in a single shot. Epic Games explained that their inclusion was designed to bring players of all skill levels together, where anyone can win. Now, as admirable as that sounds, longtime fans saw their inclusion as a complete imbalance to the game. Now look, it's nice. It's nice to let some random mouth breather who can just about slobber over their controller to win a few games when they get lucky with a brute. It's a nice idea, but if it completely breaks the game for everyone else, it's just not worth it. Fans took to Twitter in droves, and as a result, Epic Games finally backed down, removing the brutes from all competitive and casual matches. Although Fortnite didn't really suffer as a result, it does prove that in certain cases, enough of a fan backlash can make even the most seemingly untouchable developers back down. 4. DMC Devil May Cry. In many ways, this game was doomed from the start. The main bone of contention was the redesign of series protagonist Dante, who now looked younger and more brooding. This was part of a drive by developers Ninja Theory to appeal to a new generation of gamer, and make a distinct mark on the series. Ninja Theory's creative director was determined to stick with the new design, explaining that if Dante, dressed as he was, walked into any bar outside of Tokyo, he'd get laughed out. However, the controversy surrounding DMC was not singularly about Dante's new look. It was a tug-of-war between fans who wanted more of the same, and the developers who saw this as their chance to reboot the series and start afresh. Upon release, the game was met with critical acclaim, receiving praise particularly for its engaging story and fantastic level design. However, the sales figures tell a very different story. Initial targets of 2 million copies were sharply revised to 1.2 million copies actually sold. That's really just over half of what they anticipated getting. Those are big numbers to lose. These differing visions of fans and creators for such a beloved franchise only served to create uncertainty on the direction of the series, ultimately harming the game's legacy. 3. Aliens Colonial Marines. This game sucks, man. This game sucks. Now, the Alien universe has one of the most readily available player bases in gaming, boasting titles spanning almost the entire history of video games. One of the most anticipated was this terrible game, Aliens Colonial Marines. From the trailer at least, fans were promised good things. It was a love letter to James Cameron's Aliens, keeping the same grimy aesthetic as well as keeping the iconic setting from the film. The game was also considered canon, and even promised to resolve some lost plot threads from the films. But then came release day and the final product seemed half-finished and horribly rushed, the graphics looking way worse than they did in the trailers. It was extremely buggy, and the AI was virtually broken. A particular highlight involved xenomorphs strutting past the player, oblivious to their presence as if just on a lunch break. This actually culminated in fans taking Sega to court, arguing that the gameplay and visuals from early footage was far removed from the final game. Sega finally settled out of court for a cool $1.25 million, causing them major financial and reputational damage. 2. Metal Gear Survive. Metal Gear Solid with zombies. Sure, it's an intriguing premise, but it really didn't live up to expectations. The game had you alternating between killing zombies, base management, and resource grinding in a frankly very repetitive cycle. Series creator Hideo Kojima was always a big part of the appeal of the Metal Gear series, and his absence on Metal Gear Survive was notable, after a spectacular public fallout with Konami. The originality and humor that was such a trademark of Kojima was not evident in any way here. Any resemblance to its predecessor, The Phantom Pain, was unflattering, reusing many of the same mechanics and visuals. It just felt to fans like the developers did not have enough consideration as to how this would fit into the franchise as a standalone story. The overall package was so far removed from what constitutes a Metal Gear Solid game that there was little to no appeal to fans of the series. Now, the game wasn't terrible, but it was so far removed from what constituted Metal Gear that the most fans could do was greet it with complete indifference. 1. Sonic Boom, Rise of Lyric. Now, there have been many bad Sonic games in the past, but none have been quite so spectacularly misjudged as Sonic Boom, Rise of Lyric. Classic Sonic games had the player flying through levels at breakneck speed, jumping on enemies and collecting rings. In Rise of Lyric, often entire sections of the game would grind to a halt. Combat was slow and repetitive, and the puzzle sections were usually nothing more than pressing switches. The game was also severely laggy, with the frame rate dropping alarmingly during the running sections of the game, making it, honestly, borderline unplayable. It also contains one of gaming's most infamous modern glitches. By manipulating Knuckles' double jump, players could skip entire levels and complete the game in less than an hour, and that would still be playing this game for far too long. Furthermore, it was clear to fans of the franchise even before it released that this was one to stay away from. Early footage of the game was very poorly received, and the developers did little to improve the game. As a result, Rise of Lyric has now been labelled as the most critically panned and worst-selling Sonic game of all time. And that brings us to the end, folks. 10 video games that alienated their own franchise. Feel free to drop this video a like if you enjoyed it, and drop me a follow on Twitter at @uslidedowlu. I'm Will for WhatCulture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.